In this video, you're going to learn how to add models and even import models into React and actually make them interactive and even add these questionable animations. But you're going to learn about different things like different shapes that you can have and textures and all of that kind of stuff. So make sure you watch this whole video to not miss anything out. Before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel to not miss any upcoming content like this. Comment down below if you have any questions or if you have anything else that you'd like to say. But now let's get started. As always, go to your desktop, right click anywhere and press on open in terminal. This time we're going to create a Vite project or a Vite React project. So we're going to run npx create Vite and I'm going to write at latest to check if there's any updates. And in this case I do, so I'm going to press on yes. We're going to call this Three.js. And for the framework, we're going to choose React. We're going to say plain JavaScript. And now let's cd to Three.js. We're going to run npm install, which is going to install all of the dependencies. And now we can open this in VS Code. So we're going to run code space period. And here's going to be our Vite project. Now we're going to install the dependencies that we need. So I'm going to copy and paste this. So npm install 3 at types 3 at React 3 Fiber and at React 3 Drei. Press on enter and now we wait. Now that we have that done, let's go inside of our source app.jsx and we can clear this boilerplate code. And now inside of our return, we can return a canvas, which should be coming from at React 3 Fiber. And let's go ahead and close that. We can remove some of this code too. So the hook and these two imports. And the reason that we need a canvas is because it sets up a scene and a camera and a few other components like the light and of course the mesh, which we of course have to add by ourselves. But the reason that it's very important is because it renders our scene every frame, which means that we don't need a loop that would run every single frame to render the mesh and all of the different components that we have inside of the canvas. But now that we have it, we can go ahead and create a mesh inside of it. There's going to be the mesh, and in simple terms, a mesh is a basic scene object in Three.js, which can have a few properties like the geometry, which would be the type of object that we want. So we can make a cube, we can make a sphere and that kind of stuff. And of course we have the material, which would be things like the texture and that sort of thing. And the first thing that we're going to add is going to be the geometry. So it's already giving me a suggestion, box geometry. And I'm going to go over a few ones in a bit, but box geometry. And then under that, we can put the type of material that we want, which would be mesh standard material. And again, I'm going to go over the different types of geometries and materials in a bit, but let's go ahead and save this. And I forgot to record me running this, but to run this, you're going to run npm run dev, and this is going to start a local server. So I'm going to go ahead and open it. And if we take a look at it, we can see our box, but it's going to be pretty far away. And also it's going to be dark because we haven't added a light that would shine on it. And we also haven't added a color, which are things that we're going to need to add. And again, I'm using the React 3 Fiber docs if you want to look at this more in depth, but we can close that now. Or before I do, I want to go over this code right here because this is another way to write Three.js, but we're writing it in React code over here. But as we can see here, we have to create a scene first. Then we have a camera, which we also have to create, but we will in a bit. And here we can see that they're using a perspective camera. There's a few different types of camera, which I'll go over in a bit. Here we're going to be putting the dimensions. And then we also need a renderer, which again, the canvas has already created, which also includes the camera, because if we didn't have the camera, then we wouldn't be able to see our mesh. Here we can see that it's adding our renderer inside of this canvas container, which is going to be some sort of div. And in this case, it would be this right here. Now we have our mesh, which right over here is just a mesh, but down here we're actually setting the geometry to be a box geometry. And then the material is going to be mesh standard material. And in here, we're adding the mesh inside of the scene. And we have a function here, which is animate, which renders everything. And we can see that this right here is a lot simpler because again, we have the canvas component, which makes all of this simpler and removes the need for functions like this that would run frame by frame. Funny enough, I forgot to record me teaching this, but you're going to want to go ahead and remove the app.css and clear out the index.css, and we're going to select the root. And here we're going to set the width to be 100 view width. Same goes for the height. Now it's going to be centered again, but we're going to go inside of the canvas and actually change our camera a little bit. So what that means is we're going to use a perspective camera, and that's because this is going to make it a lot easier to position everything. So instead of using the default camera that we get in our canvas, we're going to create our own, and we're going to want to make this default. Now we're also going to set the positioning. So we're going to set this to 0, 0, 0. Now we're not going to see our cube anymore, but let's change the Z axis to be 10, and let's let's go over this real quick. So inside of our perspective camera, we have our X value. So if I set this to 5, we're not going to see it anymore. But if I set this to 1, we can see that it's going to move to the left. If I set this to 1, it's going to go down. So there's going to be the X, Y, and the Z value. If I set this to 5, our cube is going to get larger. And of course, if I set both of these, it's going to be in the middle. So we're going to set this back to 10. And also, if we set that back to 1, we can kind of see a line going backwards. And this is where the 3D comes in. But we can go inside of our mesh standard material now and try adding a color to our box. So let's center this again. So to do that, we're going to add a color property and let's set that to red. We can see that for some reason our color didn't change, and that's where lighting comes in. So we're going to start with a very basic light, which you're always going to want to have. And this one is going to be the ambient light, and we're going to set the intensity to be 0.5. And now we can see that the color has appeared, and what the ambient light does is it lights up the whole scene. And of course we can change the intensity to be 1, and it's going to be even brighter. So let's change this to blue, and of course the color is also going to change, but there's different types of light like directional light and point light, which I'm going to go over in a bit. But those are the types of lights that actually create shadows and that kind of stuff, which makes our objects look more 3D. But now let's say that we want to change the dimensioning of our box. Well, we can also do that by going inside of the box geometry and adding a property called args. I misspelled that, so let's fix that. But let's just set everything to be 1, 1, 1, and nothing changed. But if we set this right here to be 2, we can see that it gets wider. Same goes with this. So this is going to be the X, or the width. This is going to be the height, and this is going to be the depth. So if we set that to 4, we can see that it gets larger, but that's because it changes the size of the depth. And if you know how 3D works, it's kind of like stretching the object towards you in this case. So we're just going to set this back to 0, and you'll see how this works when we're able to go around the object and change the different values. But let's say that we want to change the scale. Well, that's where we go inside of the mesh and we add a scale here. 1 is going to be the default, but we can set that to 2. It gets larger, and of course we can set that to 0.5 or really any other value that you want. And then we can also change the positioning. So currently it's going to be at 0, 0, 0, but if we let's actually set this to 0.5 so that we have more room for the positioning. But if we set this to 1, we can see that it goes to the right. -1 would go to the left. Same goes with the height. So 1 is going to go up, -1 is going to go down, and then this is going to be the Z. So if I set this to 5, it's going to get larger. 10 is going to be even larger. So let's set that to maybe 7, and now we can see it. 0 is going to be the default one, but if we set that to -5, then it's going to get farther because again, this is the Z positioning, and this is pretty much what it looks like. So Y is going to go up and down, X is going to go left to right, and Z is going to be the depth. Now let's say that I want to change the rotation. We can also do that inside of the mesh. So let's actually just change the position to rotation, and we set this to, let's say, 90. And now we can see that it doesn't look 3D, but all that we have to do is change the depth in the box geometry, and we can finally see how the depth actually affects the object. We can see the cube, but it doesn't look as good because of the lighting. So again, the ambient light just lights up the scene, but it doesn't create those shadow effects and that kind of stuff, which is where the directional light comes in. But we can also rotate it on the y-axis, and same goes with the z-axis, so 90. But let's just keep it at 0 and see what happens when we add a directional light. So directional light intensity, let's set that to 1, change this one to 0.5. But now if we save, we can see different sides of the cube, and that's because of the directional light, which casts parallel light rays, which create sharp shadows, as we can see over here. And the other type of light that we can also use is going to be the point light. If we save that, nothing's really going to happen. That's because we have to add positioning here. So let's add the positioning here, and we still can't really see it for some reason, which means that we have to play with it, but we'll do that in a bit. So let's just go back to the directional light, and then we can change the positioning here, of course, too. So default is going to be 0, 0, 0. Then if we change this to 5, we can see a change in the x-axis. If we change this to 10, nothing really changes much. But then if we go inside of the y-axis, now we can see that it's coming from the left and also from the top, so somewhere from there. And then also if we do the z-axis, it's not really going to change much, so let's just do it one by one. So again, the x-axis, if we set this to 50, it's going to be coming from here. Set that back to 0. If we set this to 50, it's going to be coming from the y-axis. And then if we set the z to 50, it's going to be coming from the depth. But we can set this to something like 555, maybe remove this right here, which will make this the brightest and then this less brighter, which again we can also change. So if we set that to 25, this side is going to be brighter, this side is going to be less brighter. And again, there's a lot of different things that you can change here. So maybe let's set this to 0, and now we can see that these two are going to be the same color, and then this guy is going to be the brightest. But again, we can change the rotation, and then we can set this one to be 5, this one to be maybe 15, and you do have to play around and see see what you really want, but we can do different things like whenever we, for example, press on the mesh, we can change the rotation by creating a useState, that kind of stuff. So let's do that real quick just to see what that looks like. So const rotation, set rotation. This is going to be an array. Let's import that 0, 0, 0, and then we're going to set the rotation to be rotation, and then we can add an onClick here. So whenever we press on it, let's set rotation to be, for the X, we're going to set rotation 0 will be plus, let's just say 25. And then let's do the same for all the other ones. So whenever we press on it, we can see that it rotates and we can see how the light affects it. But now let's say that we wanted to make this an animation so that we don't have to click it every time. Well, to do that, let's create a cube. And in here, we are going to return our mesh over here. So we can cut this out, paste it in here. And this is also good practice since you're not going to want to put all of your different meshes in here. You're usually going to want to create a component and usually even create a file for every model they're going to have. But we're going to cut this out, paste this in here. Actually, we don't need the useState anymore, so we can remove that. But in here, we're going to run our cube. Let's add some space. Cube, we don't need the useState anymore, so we can remove this. Same goes with the onClick over here. And now what we're going to use is we're going to use useRef. So const, we can also name this cube. That would be useRef. We're going to go inside of the mesh, add the ref in here. And for some reason, we can't see our cube anymore. And that's because of the error. But now we're going to use a hook called useFrame, which automatically runs every frame. And that's set to 60 FPS. But we're going to write useFrame. And this also comes from Fiber, but useFrame. And here we're going to check if cube.current, then we're going to write cube.current.rotation.x, and then we can add 0.01 to it. Then we're also going to do the same for the y. So let's copy that, change this to y. Same goes with that. And now we can see that the animation runs and our cube rotates by itself. And of course, if you want to, you can slow it down by adding another 0 here. So now it looks like it's kind of in slow-mo, but we're going to set this to 0.01 again. Same goes in here. And you can have multiple cubes in here if you wanted to. So let's add another cube, and now they're going to be together, but of course we can change the position here. So if we add position and save it, nothing's going to change because we have to receive our props in here and then add our props inside of the mesh. And now we can change our positioning freely. So let's set that to 2. Let's also add the positioning in here. Let's set both of the X to be 0, and then let's set this one to -2. And now we have 2 cubes rotating, and you can add even more if you wanted to. And I want to go over the different types of geometries that we have. So I'm just going to copy and paste this in here. We don't need the useFrame, so we're just going to comment this out. There's going to be 6 different types of shapes that we have. So at the very top, we have the box geometry. Then we have the sphere geometry. It's going to be the cylinder. Then we have the torus, cone, and the dodecahedral. Since we have all of these different shapes, let's actually take a look at how the different materials affect them. So here I'm going to paste in the code, and here we can see all the different types that we have. So there's the mesh basic, mesh standard, and everything else. So we're going to start with the mesh standard, which is going to be our cube. And this material does not respond to lighting, as we can see. Since it's all just the same color, we can still see the 3D kind of, and it's not the best, but the most common one is going to be the mesh standard material. And this one reacts to light, as we can see, and it's the one that kind of looks the best. So then we have the mesh fong material, which adds a little bit of shyness. And then there's the mesh tone material, which is used for the torus, and it creates a cartoon-like shading effect, as we can see over here. Then we have the mesh normal material, which displays surface normal as colors. This one is mainly used for debugging how lighting and reflections work. And this one is a texture for shading. So the matte cap and then also the standard material are the 2 basic ones that you're going to be using the most. So we're going to go back to this code over here. Let's refresh. Here's going to be both of our cubes. And let's go ahead and change this to basic. Now we can see that it's one color. We were using mesh standard, which is why we could actually see the shadows. Now if we want to add a texture, well, you can go to Chrome, search up any sort of texture that you want. So for example, with texture, I installed this one and I put it inside of my public folder. So there it is. We can go inside of the cube, and here we're going to create a variable called texture, and we're going to use a hook called useTexture in here. Make sure it's coming from Drei, and the path is going to be texture, of course. Now we can go inside of our material, and here we are going to write map. We're going to put the texture in here, put it in the wrong place. So let's put it in here. If we save, we can see that it's going to be dark, but if we remove this and reload again. Now we're going to see our texture. And of course, the materials have a little bit different looks even with textures, but the mesh standard material is for the most realistic rendering, but there's a few ones that change the looks of it a little bit, but I'm not going to go over every single one because I don't want this video to be too long. But now that we know how to change the texture, let's go over how we can download models and actually use them inside of our app. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is search up Sketchfab, which has a lot of different free models. Then you're going to want to sign up because they're not going to let you download any models if you're not logged in. But I'm going to use this other browser because I don't have an account with that email. But here you can search up for anything that you want. So for example, if you wanted a car, we can search that up, but we're going to look for ones with the download icon. And let's say that I wanted to download this car over here. Well, I'm going to press on it. Here's going to be the model. It's going to take some time to render everything. But again, here's going to be our car. We can press on download 3D model, and we're going to want to download a GLTF file and also a GLB file. So we're going to download both of these over here. I'm going to allow it. And now I'm going to close this window, and we're going to go inside of the public folder, create a models folder. I'm going to drag and drop the GLB file in here, and for the GLTF file, it's going to be a folder that you have to extract. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm not going to show on screen, but here it is. This is going to be the extracted folder, and now we're going to go in our browser again and search up GLTF to React. We're going to use this right here, and we're going to drag and drop the scene.bin, scene.gltf, and the textures inside of here. We're going to close that, and now we can open it, and here's going to be the model. And we can see that and convert it to a React component. So we can go ahead and copy this, and let's go and paste it where our cube is, or actually let's create a new component for that. So we're going to go inside of our source components, and let's just name this one car.jsx, paste this in here, change that to car, and we do have to export it. So car, default car. We're going to change this to an arrow function, props. And now we're going to change this. So instead of scene.gltf, this is going to go to the models, and then this is going to be, let's find it. So models, old rusty car, rename that to car, models, car, and then glb. Copy this, paste it in here. Now we can go inside of our app.jsx. We can comment this out. Now let's try to get our car. So car, and it's coming from components. Yeah, so everything here works. And now let's see if this even works. So if we go in here, here's going to be our car. We do have to change a few things, but let's close that. Let's set the scale, maybe 0.5, even smaller, so 2.5. So here's going to be the car, and we can see that this model is very, very large. So 5, 8, but let's try rotating it. So rotation, and here's going to be the side of the car. And this is really all you need to know on how to import other models. But before so here's going to be the side of the car. And of course, if we go inside of the car, we can change the scale here too and that kind of stuff, but I wouldn't really recommend that. And before in this video, I want to go over orbital control, so you can move your mouse and see around the car, and it's really simple and straight to the point. So we're going to go to the bottom here and add orbital controls, and let's see what's going on. So for some reason getting an error, and that's because I need to close it. But now if you left click and use your mouse, then you can rotate around the car and zoom in and zoom out. And of course, if we add the cubes, which I removed for some reason, so there they are. We can also look around them, and let's move them a little bit higher. So change this to 4, -4. And now we have a car and 2 rotating cubes, which is pretty funny. But yeah, so this is really all you need to know about Three.js and Fiber. And if you want me to make a video on how you can actually use this knowledge to make a website that looks pretty nice with cool animations and even make it responsive, then let me know down in the comments below. But this is where I'm going to end this video. So I really hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did, then make sure to leave a like. Subscribe to this channel to not miss any upcoming content like this, and hopefully see you in the next video.